Today is November 29th. It's 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and this is the first week for Natural Philosophy live classes. These classes will be available on the Academy's YouTube channel, but it's recommended that students actually seek them on the Vimeo channel instead. If you go to vimeo.com/classical liberal arts, you can access these videos and they won't have any of the goofy YouTube ads or anything added to them. So the best way for students to access these videos is actually on Vimeo. We'll meet every Wednesday afternoon, God willing, at 3 o'clock to study Aristotle's Physics and Metaphysics, which are the two main texts of natural philosophy. Today we'll sort of introduce the study of philosophy in general and then natural philosophy in particular, so we understand exactly what we're doing, and then we'll go ahead and jump right into lesson one of Aristotle's Physics. So what I'd like to do here is share my screen so we can walk through a document together. Up on the screen here, you can see this document. It's titled An Overview of Philosophy. And it's important for us to, before we get into these studies, to talk about what philosophy is, because many of you, especially, for some adult students, if you've already been in college, or for younger students, if you're planning to go to college, in a modern college, you're going to run into courses or even whole departments that are called philosophy that really have nothing to do with philosophy. They really are not interested in true philosophy. They are more like historians who talk about philosophy, the history of philosophy, and so on. But for the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, our concern is not to simply talk about the history of philosophy, to be able to name a bunch of philosophers and talk about what ideas they published and things like that. We really don't care about most of that. Many of the ideas, many of the philosophers are really irrelevant, or they're just false. And there's no award for someone who can, memorize the most false philosophy. There's no point of that. We want to actually pursue philosophy for its real purpose, which is the purpose why ancient philosophers developed it and pursued it and taught it, the history's wisest and best men. So what I'd like to do is provide an overview of what real philosophy is, so we have a clear understanding of what we're going to be doing in classical liberal arts courses, because it's very different from what's done in a college philosophy class. There's a reason why college philosophy departments and college classics departments can't keep themselves open. They can't find students. Nobody's interested in their classes. It's because they're so boring, because they don't serve the real purpose of classical studies. They don't serve the real purpose of philosophy studies. And really, nobody's interested in what they offer. It's boring and useless. Whereas we'll see this stuff that we study in real philosophical studies, this is very useful and not boring at all. So what I'd like to do today is just walk through an overview of philosophy to explain what it is, how it applies to natural philosophy, and then we'll jump into natural philosophy today and get started. And every week we'll just be reading through and discussing Aristotle's Physics. And if we get through that, or maybe we'll take breaks once in a while, and we'll also study Aristotle's Metaphysics, and eventually just spend more and more time on metaphysics. And you'll understand what that is in just a little bit. So looking at this overview of philosophy, the first question, of course, is what is philosophy? And philosophy is the love of wisdom, the pursuit of wisdom. That's why I say in a modern college philosophy class, the people there are not gathered because they're pursuing wisdom. They're gathered there usually because they need 3 credits for their degree, and they've got to take courses in different fields, and they're required to take a philosophy course. There are very few philosophy majors, very few students actually pursuing wisdom. They're just looking for credits, and a philosophy course is often a way to get credits that are needed. But real philosophy is the love of wisdom. So it's not limited to a school or a school program. It's not, it's not something you major in and get a degree for. It's an entire life devoted to the pursuit of wisdom. That's what philosophy is. A philosopher is a person who devotes his life to the pursuit of wisdom. And usually in history, they lived pretty radical lives because they didn't want any distractions. They lived, usually they separated themselves from all of the hustle and bustle of busy life. They went out into places where they could be alone to study and meditate. They lived lives in solitude, devoted to study and reflection. And then what they tried to do was learn as much as they could, and then write some helpful books that they could leave behind for, let's say, the next generation, or share with others. And they considered their contribution to the public life was their writings. Their writings were their contribution. So you might say, well, what's this philosopher doing? He lives out in the country by himself. He lives in a house up in the mountains and he just studies all day long. Isn't that a selfish life? What do these people actually do? Well, it's just a different vocation in life, and what they try to make their contribution to society is not necessarily their work in politics or their work in business or government or things like that. Their contribution is the fruit of all of their studies. At some point, they try to condense it, write it down, and then share that and leave it behind for the next generation. So there is a public service, there is a charitable work in true philosophy, but it has to do with leaving behind the results of your studies. Saint Dominic, when he founded the Dominican order, the motto for the Dominican order, or at least one of the mottos for the Dominican order, was to contemplate and to share the fruits of contemplation. To contemplate and share the fruits. There's another motto that comes from Dominican sources, and it says, you cannot give what you do not have. You cannot give what you do not have. So you could say, well, I want to be a teacher and I want to change the world and I want to help people. Well, it's kind of arrogant to think that you're going to help people when you haven't yet learned anything significant that can actually help people. So in order to help people, in order to be generous, in order to do good and teach others and so on, there's a time where you've got to do work in private by yourself to actually make yourself good at something, or make yourself intelligent so that you have something to share. So that work is usually done in privacy. There's a lot of lonely, difficult work done quietly that no one else sees, where someone makes himself wise or makes himself intelligent so that he can then turn around and offer the fruits of all of that lonely work for the benefit of his neighbor. So it is a charitable way of life, but I think it's also a humble way of life, because we don't just assume that we have something to offer from day one. We say, no, I've got to learn and grow and gain skills so that one day when I'm older, I can share things and help people. So it is a charitable life if it's lived rightly. But philosophy is the love or pursuit of wisdom, and then usually the application of that wisdom is to turn around and help others by the use of that wisdom to solve problems, answer questions, give advice, and so on. So philosophy is the love or pursuit of wisdom. And then we have to ask the question, what is wisdom? And we'll get different definitions from different philosophers, but this definition here is given to us by St. Thomas Aquinas. He says, wisdom is the perfection of reason. Wisdom is the perfection of reason. And this is a really great definition. When God created us, he created us in his own image. He gave us souls, not just bodies, but souls as well. And he gave certain powers to our souls that make us really special in creation. And most importantly, he gave us the power of reason. And so he gave us this power, but he gave it to us in a natural form. It has potential to do great good. It also has potential to do great evil. We could choose to develop it and use it, or we could choose to waste it. God has also given us muscles, but we can study how to improve the use of our muscles, and we can work to train our muscles to get the most out of our muscles that we can possibly get, to get the most work out of our body that's possible, to fulfill our potential as human beings. We can think about that with respect to muscles. Just because you have muscles doesn't mean that you're strong. Just because you are given muscles at birth doesn't mean you actually do with those muscles what you could have done with those muscles. It's a matter of study and training and use that actually brings those muscles to the fulfillment of their potential. And the same is true with reason. Reason is like a muscle. It's given to us. It's a natural power, but it has to be developed. It has to be improved, and it has to be used. It has to be exercised and trained and made to work, or else it's really just a wasted natural gift. Wisdom is the perfection of reason. So when we develop reason, when we study to understand reason, when we rightly order reason, and then when we begin to put reason to work, to do all of the work that it's capable of doing, we bring that natural faculty of reason to perfection. We bring it to its completion, to its fulfillment, what God actually intended it to do and to be. We cause that perfection of the power of reason. And that state of the perfection of reason, that's what St. Thomas said is wisdom. Wisdom is the perfection of reason. Okay, so that's a good definition. A good way to think about wisdom is us working to take this natural gift we've been given of reason. Every one of us has been given this gift, and to study it and develop it and cause it to work, to actually bring it to its end, to the fulfillment of God's purpose for it. And that is to be understood as wisdom. That's a very helpful definition. Now, when we talk about reason, the main thing that reason does, the main power of reason, it says here, it pertains to reason to know order. What reason does is it helps us to identify or to recognize order in things, and it also helps us to order things. So order in two different ways. It helps us to recognize order, and it helps us to order things. So reason relates in a number of important ways to order. That's really what reason has to do with. It's the work of a wise man to order things. If you think about it, who is in charge of the business? Who tells the employees what to do? Who gives the instructions? Who is it that orders things? It's the wisest man. He's the one who's in charge of the business. Who directs the army? It's not the strongest man. It's not the fastest man. It's not the man who's the best shooter. It's the wisest man. It's the general who directs the army. The general orders the army. He orders all the soldiers. He considers all of the equipment, all the ammunition, all the supplies, and he manages all of that to accomplish the end that the army is seeking to accomplish. So we see that it's the wise men in different areas of life, the wise who order things. A woman, if a woman is a housewife with children, she takes responsibility for the whole house, and she orders the house according to wisdom. That's what it means to be to do the work of household management. It means to figure out how the house should be ordered to bring it to its end, to accomplish its purpose. So any area of life that we're interested in, wisdom allows us to understand and establish order in that area of our lives. And so there's a general wisdom that applies to the whole entire universe, which is to understand the order of the whole world. And then there are kinds of wisdom that allow us to order very specific things, like things we do, to play a musical instrument, to compose music, to start a business, any kind of practical work, any kind of thing that we could pursue. We talked a little about this the other day. It allows us to actually gain mastery of practical activities because we have wisdom to order these things through reason. So there's four important ways that reason relates to order. There's four important ways. And I mentioned before, sometimes reason simply identifies or observes the order that exists in things. And sometimes reason works to actually establish order in things. So there's two different uses of reason, two different actions of reason, but reason relates to order in four ways. And let's just go through these and we'll see how this relates to our study of natural philosophy. The first way is that reason, as I said, reason observes order in things that have already been made. Reason can observe and identify order in those things. That's the first way that reason relates to order. Reason is able to observe and recognize order in things. And this is very common because we do this every single day. If you go to a zoo or, just look online at animals, you can see a tiger, you can see a lion, you can see a small house cat, and you can recognize that all of them are similar. They may be different colors, they may be different sizes, they may have different body shapes and things like that. But when you look at those different animals, you'll say, they're all the same. They're all the same. Even though they're different, they're all the same, because you can recognize that there's an order in these things that goes beyond mere appearances. There's something about these animals that's the same. And then you can look at a bunch of dogs and you can see a giant Great Pyrenees dog and a tiny little lap dog and a poodle and a German shepherd, totally different animals in appearance. And yet you can look at them and say, they're all the same, because you can recognize that there's something similar in all of them. And yet you can look at those dogs and then look at the cats and say, those are different from those. They're not the same. These animals are the same, but these are different. They all have four legs. They've all got claws. They've all got teeth. They've all got whiskers. They've got two ears. They've all got tails. Yet there's something different. These are one kind of thing, and those are another kind of thing. And reason allows us to recognize that order in the natural world. So the first way that reason relates to order is reason allows us to observe order that exists in things that have already been made. The second way is that reason actually allows us to examine ourselves. Reason allows us, this is very weird to think about, but reason allows us to think about ourselves. Animals don't do this. Plants don't do this. Only human beings think about themselves. I mean, you can almost feel like you can separate yourself and think about your own thoughts. A good example is when we pray the rosary. You can be praying the prayers of the rosary with your mouth and saying the prayers, and your mind can be doing other things. You can be thinking about yourself praying the rosary, thinking about your words while you also think about other things. It's very bizarre when you take time to think about it, but reason allows us to examine ourselves, which is very strange. It's able to contemplate itself. This is the second kind of order that reason relates to, order of contemplation, when contemplation, the object of the contemplation is our soul itself, reason itself. So that's the second order. The third is the ordering of the will. So reason can reflect upon the soul again in another way, where it considers the actions of the will that is within us. So reason can consider through deliberation. Deliberation means simply thinking through controversial issues. Reason can establish order in the will and bring us into virtue, which is a well-ordered life, a well-ordered will. So reason can also be used to order the will. And then fourthly, reason can be used through planning to establish order in external things, establish order in things outside of us. So these are the four different ways that reason relates to order, four different kinds of things that reason can do. Reason can recognize order in things outside of us, things that have already been made. Reason can order itself. Reason can order our will, and reason can be used by us to order things outside of us. So these are the four different ways that reason relates to order. So if wisdom is the perfection of reason, and if reason works to know order, then these are the four things that we will need to do to pursue wisdom. We'll need to study these things and learn these different orders, and we'll need to do these things and actually use reason to cause these different kinds of order in our lives and in the lives of others around us. Now, when we look at these four different ways, what happens is, in order for us to do these things and study these things, four different sciences develop. There are four different sciences, and it's the study of these four different sciences that allows us to perfect reason, to seek wisdom. The first one, if you remember here, reason does not establish the order, but it simply observes order that has already been established by things that are made. That's the first kind of order with respect to reason. And this order is observed in the natural world outside of us. We observe this order in the natural world, the world that God created, what we call the creation. We can look at the created world and we can see that it's not chaotic. It's not all random. Everything doesn't happen by chance every day. There's order. Scientists talk about natural laws. You know that, it's November 29th. You know that in another 20 or 30 days, the weather is going to change. It's going to get colder, and we're going to enter into winter. And that's going to continue for 3 months or so. And then in mid-March, around March 20th, the weather is going to start to change. It's going to warm up. The plants are going to grow. The grass is going to grow. Everything's going to turn green. And then it's going to go into summer and then fall and then back to winter. And it does this every year. You can recognize the order in the natural world. You can get up in the morning while it's still dark outside, and you can look to the east and point to the east and say, in a couple hours, the sun is going to rise right over there. And lo and behold, in a little bit of time, you start to see the sky change color and the sun rises in the east. And you can say it's going to travel across the sky through the course of the day. And at the end of the day, it's going to set right over there. And there can be a specific thing on the horizon that you point at, and you can say, the sun is going to go down right behind that tree right over there later on today. And you can recognize the order that exists in the natural world. It's not a chaotic world with things flying all over the place. The plants and animals, the air, the sun, the moon, and stars, all the different elements, they're not all chaotic and random. If you study it and if you pay attention to it, if you observe it, you can identify order that exists in the natural world. Now, it's very complicated because there's so much that's made, and you could never study all the individual things. So a wise man wouldn't do that. A wise man wouldn't seek to understand the activity and order of every single little thing that exists, every squirrel, every bird, every plant, every animal, and so on. That'd be foolish. There's no way to do that. The number of individual things is almost infinite. So what a wise man would do, just as when we study grammar, we don't study every word, we study classes of things. We seek to understand the principles that explain everything, that apply to each individual thing. So if we understand the principle, we understand everything influenced by that principle. So in seeking wisdom, we're going to seek to understand the order that exists in the natural world. This is what natural philosophy really is. So it's got to do with that first kind of order, where reason observes order that exists outside of itself in things that were already made. That's the study of natural philosophy. Now, that order that exists, that order is what the philosophers call nature. So when we read Aristotle, anytime he says the word nature, What he's referring to is that order that exists in the natural world, the reason why things do what they do, the principles of the natural world. That's what the ancient philosophers refer to as nature. In modern times, when we hear the word nature, we might just think of, things that exist outside, things that exist naturally, like birds, plants, flowers, leaves, grass. That's nature. But that's not what Aristotle means by nature. He means the order that exists in the world, the reason why things do what they do. And I'll give you an example. One of the most amazing things I ever experienced, one of the most amazing things I ever experienced was, when our children were born. Childbirth is something that you look forward to and you prepare for, but when you experience it, there's just no way to explain how amazing it all is. And you've got, you're for me, to have my wife and her go through her whole pregnancy, and that's all great, but when the baby's born is where you actually experience this reality of nature, because this baby is born, and this baby has never existed outside of its mother's body. This baby has never breathed. This baby has never opened its eyes, has never done anything yet. And yet when that baby is born, that baby begins to look for food as soon as it's born. The baby begins to look for food, and it already knows where that food can be found. It knows that there's food available somewhere, and they can get that food by sucking. And the baby starts looking, and the baby it sucks on its fingers, it sucks on its hands. Anything you put in front of that baby when it's first born, the baby will start sucking on it, because the nature in the child, in that baby, it's already programmed to know how to get its food. And it's just a matter of time, usually a matter of minutes, before the midwife or the nurse and the mother get the baby cleaned up and ready. And the next thing you know, the baby's eating. And this baby has been outside the mother's body for minutes. And you see, it already knows what to do. And you can ask, how in the world did this thing that was created inside the mother's body move into a world it's never been in before and know what to do? There's no way to explain that. And when, we can talk about it, and that's one thing. It's one thing to talk about. But when you stand there and actually watch this baby begin to look around and move around to try to find its food, and then once it gets set up with the mother, it's called latching on when it starts to drink. And you watch this baby just start drinking milk as if it knew all along what was going to happen and what was waiting for it. That's nature. You see that? There's no way to explain that. That's nature. The same thing is true with farm animals that are born. These animals are born, they are born onto the ground. The mother cleans them up, and within minutes, those babies are poking around looking for their mother's milk. And there's no way to explain how they know any milk exists, how they know where to look, how they know what to do. That is nature. And just by observing the world, we can see those things. We can see that this baby was designed to know what to do, and there's no way to explain it. It's nature. It's an order that exists in things that are made. And by observation, reason allows us to observe that and see that and recognize it. So that's what Aristotle means by nature. We don't, especially if you're living in a city or a suburb, you don't often see these things very much. But when you're out in the country with animals, you see these things much more commonly and notice them. And especially, like I said, childbirth is the most amazing experience of that, because it's hard enough to go through pregnancy as a husband with your wife when she's got to bear with so many difficulties and troubles, and her body's growing and changing, and you get to the last few weeks of pregnancy and it's just so difficult for her. And then this baby's born, and you experience that, and then you see the baby already knowing what to do. And that's just the most bizarre, mysterious experience. And it's one of the clearest encounters with what Aristotle would call nature. That's nature. When you see created things have an order built into them that all we can do is watch. There have even been examples where a baby was born and was simply put on the mother's stomach and just left on the mother's belly just to lay there. And the baby just slowly wiggled around and moved around and eventually found its way and found its milk and started nursing. So it's just a very bizarre thing to see, but that's what the philosophers mean by nature. These creatures that exist in the natural world, whether they're plants, animals, stones, anything, they have properties in them. They have instincts in them that can't be explained unless there is this thing called capital N nature, which is this power that exists in the natural world, this order. Now, as Christians, we don't have much of trouble with that because we say, well, God created the world and he created things to do certain things. And so when they're born, they just start doing what they were created to do. It's easy for us to understand, but philosophically, we have to understand that nature that we observe in things, it's reason that God gave us that allows us to see that and recognize that and understand the natural world, okay? So natural philosophy is the study of that nature to understand the order that exists in the natural world. And it just goes on into more and more complicated areas of life in the natural world. For example, everything that grows in the world, dies in the world, and then decays and goes back and becomes what it originally was. That's a fascinating reality of nature that no one can explain. No one can explain how the soil, out from the soil comes a plant. The plant grows into a full mature plant, produces fruit, produces seeds, then dies, decays back into the soil, leaves the seed behind, and a new plant begins. And that cycle is another example of an order in nature. And so to study nature, to recognize the order of things and simply learn the order of nature is the goal of natural philosophy. To answer the question why, that's the goal of natural philosophy. And like I said, it's not a study of individual things because the number of individual things is infinite. So it's not a study of individual things. It's not just running out into the backyard with a magnifying glass and starting to look at bugs and stuff like that. It's not just going and getting a telescope and start looking all around in the sky and start observing things. That's just observation of individuals. That's not what philosophy is. Philosophy is trying to learn and understand what the principles are. And there aren't many principles or the first causes of the things, like why do these things actually happen? What causes these things to actually happen? Getting to the causes and the principles gives us wisdom that applies to all of the individuals. And that's what we're seeking in the study of natural philosophy. All right. Now, when we want to study natural philosophy, fortunately, we live at a point in history where natural philosophy has already been established and taught. It's been taught by Aristotle. And we study natural philosophy in two of Aristotle's books, Aristotle's Physics and Aristotle's Metaphysics. These are the two books in which we study classical natural philosophy. Now, you'll hear people today, modern teachers or modern students, maybe even modern scientists, and they'll criticize this stuff and they'll say, that old stuff, we don't believe that stuff anymore. We don't follow Aristotle and the old philosophers and all that. But notice when people say that, I'd like you to ask one question. If you ever hear someone say that, I'd like you to ask them, have you ever studied Aristotle's natural philosophy? Or when did you study Aristotle's natural philosophy? And you'll find they never studied Aristotle's natural philosophy. So what are they really talking about? You see, it's just bias. It's just arrogant saying, oh, what we do today is better just because it's what we do. But if you would simply ask someone who criticizes it when they studied it or whether they studied it, you'll find that they didn't study it. They never studied it. And if you think about it, to criticize something and to call something false that you never actually studied is the opposite of science. So it's really bad when a scientist does that because it reveals that he's not even a good scientist, because a scientist wouldn't judge anything to be true or false that he hadn't actually examined. And you'll see this is common today, to criticize old things, to just have this what's called chronological snobbery. I'll type this for you real quick. Chronological snobbery is this attitude that anything that came before was bad and anything that's new is good. That's chronological snobbery. And many people talk like that. They just imagine that people who lived in the past were stupid. They didn't understand. They're all ignorant, superstitious, crazy people. And people today are very smart. They're scientific. They're very careful. And then you look at society and you say, are you really trying to tell me that this society is full of wise and careful and reasonable people, and past societies were worse than this? Because this society is pretty crazy. This society doesn't look like the society that's got everything figured out. You've got people with all kinds of self-inflicted physical problems, mental problems, moral problems, suicides, all kinds of, and you're telling us that this is the good and that is the bad. I think I would like some evidence that that's true before I just accept that. So when we actually question people who have that attitude about the past, we find out that they don't even know what they're talking about. They never studied these things. Think of your friends or relatives. If you start studying these things, how many of them have studied these things? Almost nobody, probably nobody. You're probably going to be the only one. So the criticism of these things is really unreasonable because nobody studies it. They criticize something without even looking into it. And that's what we call prejudice. That's what it means to be prejudiced. You judge things that you've never even examined. Like if I say, I don't like Mexicans. Mexicans are blah, blah, blah. I think they're, and then someone asks me, have you ever actually spent any time with Mexicans? Do you know any Mexicans? And you realize that people who talk like that usually have no experience with the people that they criticize. That's prejudice. It's a judgment that's not even based on any actual observation or experience. And that's why we usually accuse prejudiced people of being ignorant. It's just ignorance. So that kind of bias we also see in modern people who judge old things and just say, oh, that's stupid, that's false, that's not true, and so on, when they've never even studied it. So we're going to study Aristotle's physics and metaphysics. We're going to actually read them and learn what they teach. And you know what? You might decide one day that you think Aristotle's wrong, but you'll be able to explain why. You'll be able to point out what's wrong. Maybe you'll find most of it is true, but there's specific things you might disagree with. At least you'll have studied it, so you can talk about it reasonably and fairly, right? You can be a just judge, okay? So we're going to study Aristotle's physics and metaphysics. Stick with me here, okay? We're going to study Aristotle's physics and metaphysics. Now, you can continue reading this sheet, and it goes on to talk about other kinds of philosophy. Each one of these different sciences, like natural philosophy, that's the science that investigates this first kind of order. Rational philosophy is the science that deals with this second kind of order. Moral philosophy deals with this third kind of order. And then mechanical arts are where we practice this last kind of order. Okay, so you've got 4 different kinds of order that reason deals with. It leads us to 4 different sciences that we study and pursue in life. But in this Wednesday afternoon class, we're going to be talking about natural philosophy, and we're going to be studying Aristotle's physics. Now, again, if you take modern science classes, if you're in a modern school or go to a modern college, you're going to hear the word physics talked about all the time. And that's not the same thing as Aristotle's physics. Okay. Modern school physics is not the same thing as Aristotle's physics. In modern physics, you'll study how some things work, and you'll learn how to make calculations. You'll learn some formulas and things like that may or may not work. Usually they're overly simplified in physics classes. But that's really a different study than what Aristotle's doing in the physics. Aristotle is seeking to identify and understand what the real principles are. The first causes, the real causes of everything that exists in the natural world. What is the order that directs everything in the natural world? That's not what physics is doing. So Aristotle's physics is different. And then if you look at these two words, physics and metaphysics, obviously they look similar. This word meta in Greek means beyond. So physics relates to the study of the natural world, right? The material things that are in motion. That's what physics refers to. Metaphysics refers to things that are beyond the natural world, beyond nature, beyond material things. Okay, so another way to think about this is that physics is the study of nature or natural things. Metaphysics is the study of supernatural things. All right, supernatural things, things that go beyond physical bodies and material things. Both of these studies, physics and metaphysics, are considered parts of natural philosophy. Okay, so we'll study Aristotle's physics and metaphysics. Now, when you go to the Academy Study Center, if you go to the philosophy section and scroll down, you'll see these subjects marked core. You'll see ethics marked core, physics marked core, and metaphysics marked core, because these are the real sources of philosophy. And we see, ethics deals with moral philosophy, physics and metaphysics deal with natural philosophy. And for rational philosophy, if we go up to the trivium, rational philosophy is what we study in classical reasoning. So those classical reasoning courses, that's where we study natural philosophy. As far as mechanical arts, we study those in the world. So we're not going to have mechanical arts classes in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. If you want to learn a mechanical art, you go study and practice it in the physical world. It's order that's established outside of us in the world. So the four different kinds of order lead us to a number of different sciences. Three of them we can study academically. The fourth, we have to actually go and study and practice in the world, doing things. That's what apprenticeships are for. That's what internships are for, and so on. So those are the different ways that order relates to reason. And we pursue these four different sciences as we seek to perfect reason and become wise. Okay. And in this Wednesday afternoon class, we're going to focus on natural philosophy, studying Aristotle's physics and metaphysics. So if you want to study this online and actually get credit for these courses, the course that we're going to be studying for natural philosophy is under philosophy here, course number 321, which is classical physics. That's what we're going to be studying and discussing. So if you'd like to go through these lessons, complete the assignments, get credit for these studies, enroll yourself in classical physics, and I'll be helping you through that study. And once we get through physics, we'll move on to the next course, which is metaphysics. Okay? Now we've got like 10 minutes left. So what I want to look at real quick is the first chapter of this first book. So you see here, this is Aristotle's Physics. Originally, it was written in Greek. It's been translated into English. So we're reading an English translation. And this is book 1 of the physics and chapter 1, which is lesson 1. So I'm going to save this for next time. But what I recommend is if you haven't already gotten started on this, I recommend you study lesson 1 and read through this. try as hard as you can to understand it on your own. Take notes, maybe even do the first assignment. But next week, we'll go through this and I'll explain it in every detail. In the book, you'll notice that there are tons and tons of notes. I recommend you just ignore the notes, okay? Ignore those notes. Those notes are not written for students, learning these things when they're younger. A lot of these notes won't even, have anything to do with anything you're interested in. So ignore the small print notes and just read the larger text. That's the actual text of the lesson. So you can see sometimes half the page, look at this, 2/3 of the page is just notes. This is all that really needs to be studied. So sometimes it looks intimidating, but you just need to ignore the notes and just read the larger text. So there's not that much to read, really. So that's the physics which we'll be reading. If you really get into this and decide you love natural philosophy and want to really study it, one amazing thing we have is we have all of the commentaries that were written by St. Thomas Aquinas on these works. So when Thomas Aquinas taught in the 1200s, and he gave lectures, he actually taught these books to students in the 1200s. And we have his actual lectures that he taught 800 years ago. So if you're ever interested, if you find that you're just really interested in learning natural philosophy and you like these studies and want to get into them, there's a lot more that you could get into. But we're going to keep it simple in our weekly classes. We'll go through Aristotle's text in English translation. I'll explain everything, but if you want to go deeper, you can read through the commentaries of St. Thomas, which are his lectures. It's like going back and being a student in one of his classes 800 years ago. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing. We'll be studying this book, Aristotle's Physics, and just working through it little by little, week by week. We'll stop where some things will be complicated. We'll take more time to explain those things. Where things are simple, we'll just sort of breeze through those things. But we're just going to go one chapter at a time through the whole book, through natural philosophy. Okay? So that's what I wanted to share today, just an introduction to what natural philosophy is. I would really like to make sure that you take a look at this document. I'm going to post a link here. I'd like to make sure that you save a copy of that document, print it out, whatever you prefer, however you like to study or do things. But I'd like you to be able to answer questions like this. What is philosophy? What is reason? What does reason do? And then you say, well, reason orders things. Okay, well, what are the 4 different kinds of order? How do these different kinds of order relate to the study of philosophy? Well, it leads to 4 different sciences. Okay, what are those sciences? Where do we study them? How do we study them? I'd like you to be able to answer questions like that. One of the reasons why is because when you meet people and talk to people, let's say like over Christmas break, you have relatives visiting, they may ask, hey, what are you studying? And you'll say, oh, I'm studying philosophy. Oh yeah, what exactly are you? Oh, I'm studying natural philosophy. And then you know what the next question is going to be, right? The next question is going to be, what's that? I would like you to be able to answer those questions, What's that? I'd like you to be able to answer those questions, because those are the questions your relatives are going to ask you. If let's say one day you decide to apply to college and there's an interview and they ask you, well, what have you studied? Yeah, I study philosophy, natural philosophy. Well, what is natural philosophy? I would like you to be able to give an intelligent answer to those questions, okay? And that document, the overview of philosophy, explains all that stuff. So if you work on that, and we'll continue to discuss it and practice it together, but I want you to be comfortable with these studies, to understand what you're studying, to understand why you're studying it, to be able to explain it to someone. If you've got an 8-year-old cousin who you're spending time with over the summer, and they ask a question about what classes do you take, you can explain this to an 8-year-old. You can explain it in simple terms, talk to others about it, and it not be uncomfortable. There's nothing more embarrassing than watching a student get asked a question like, what are you studying? And the student just sort of like looks at the ground and says, oh, I don't know. I don't know math. There's nothing more embarrassing than that, when a kid just has no idea what he's even studying or supposed to be learning. I don't want you guys to be like that. So take some time, go over this sheet, and make sure you can answer basic questions like that. They're important. So that's all for today. That's what I wanted to present and go over to introduce the study. Next week, we'll just dig into Aristotle's physics and start reading. These will always be recorded. So if you, yeah, maybe some cousins wouldn't ask that, but they even, it may be even an innocent question. You're like, what classes do you have in your school? I'd like you to be able to answer those questions. Okay. But next week we'll pick up. Remember, these are all recorded. So if you can't make classes every week, it's okay. You can just watch the recording and catch us the next time. But I hope that these are helpful. And what I'd like you to do, I'll give you a link in just a minute, Elise. What I'd like you to do is make sure you're registered for classical physics and start working on lesson 1 if you haven't already, because you guys can do this. These lessons are not hard. I'll help you through them, but there's no reason you can't do these things. And it's going to be very impressive for your future studies and transcripts and college applications to see that you were able to get into philosophy, because it's not required. This isn't required for a high school diploma. And to see you get into these things and challenge yourself and study things that go beyond the minimum, it's a sign of your interest in learning. And that's the kind of things that the best schools and colleges are looking for. They're looking for kids who want to learn because they have lots of resources, and they're looking for kids to give those resources to. Okay. So that's it for today. Any questions? I'll hang out for a couple minutes, but other than that, we're ready to go. So I'm going to stop sharing this. I'll take any questions you guys have. And again, this will be recorded and posted online, and I'm going to give you a link where you can access all those commentaries. Okay. And this is going to be a lot of stuff. This link here, a link to a website that has all of the works of Thomas Aquinas translated into English, and it's tons and tons of stuff. But if you look over on the side, on the top on the right, you'll see a section where it says Commentaries on Aristotle. And if you look through that list, you'll see Physica as one of the titles of the works. And if you click on the English link, you can see English translation of all Thomas Aquinas' commentaries. Okay. Yeah. Lots of stuff. All right. So yeah, you can, I'll show you this real quick. I'll just share it while I'm on it. So from this list, if you go to Physica and click on English, you'll see that these are actually Thomas Aquinas' lectures as he taught Aristotle's physics. And you can just go through them, and I'll talk about most of this stuff and share some of it with you, but I just want you to see that there's a source where you can go to study these things yourself. You can study St. Thomas Aquinas' commentary on Aristotle's physics. Okay. So that's all available to us. An amazing resource, 800 years old for us to study today. Okay. So that's all for today. Yeah, Incredible's right. We have no excuse to not study and learn these things. We're spoiled with resources, and it's free. That's what's even crazier about it. You can go access that, study it. It won't cost you 1 penny. I don't know how we're going to give an account to God for all the resources we have. We better make sure we use them. All right. So I hope that that's a helpful introduction. That's all for today. Tomorrow, I'm going to move on, I think, to, I don't know what tomorrow's. Oh, world history. Tomorrow, 3:00 is world history. We get into history studies tomorrow. So I'll either see you then or next time in one of our other classes, but I hope that was helpful. I'm going to close up now and get moving. God bless everybody. Take care.